Grace Slick, who is 85 years old and renowned for her strong voice and captivating theatrical presence, still enthralls with her candor. Despite touching many people's hearts, she battled substance abuse behind the scenes while performing. It happened during this she met Jim Morrison during a turbulent period of her life. He and I sharing the stage, she was present when his life gradually and painfully fell apart. Now, at 85, Grace has now come forward to validate the long-standing whispers about the most sinister places of Jim's universe. After gathering the courage to ask for assistance and go past her personal obstacles, she speaks thoughtfully and clearly. Could the secrets she is currently disclosing have contributed to Jim Morrison's premature death and addiction? Come along as we examine her revelation. At 85, Grace Slick at last verifies Jim Morrison's darkest secrets. Rumors. Yes, he was gorgeous. However, he was also totally uncontrollable, Grace Slick said at last. Acknowledged at the age of 85, proving what many people had been speculating about for decades regarding Jim Morrison. Regarding for the first time, she talked candidly about the mayhem, the insanity, and the peculiar, unforgettable evening that demonstrated to her just how far gone he was. Just prior to the Europe trip, it was 1967. Grace, as well as she was at the Tropicana Motel in West Hollywood with her bandmate Paul Kantner. Once a gig is over, Jim Morrison appeared directly in front of them as they were moving down the corridor. Barking like a dog, fully naked, and high on acid. Not yelling. Not singing. Down, just barking like a lost, untamed beast, on all fours. Paul didn't flinch. He just moved past Jim and entered his room as if it were unsurprising. Grace, however, was unable to stop observing. She pondered. It was memorable, strange, and amusing. That was Jim, ethereally lovely, utterly unfiltered and already beginning to take on a deeper tone. The truth became much more obvious by 1968. The Doors and Jefferson Airplane were now touring together, performing at major venues like London. Amsterdam as well. It was a storm because of the audience's fervor, the content, and the resistance. Fed off. Even though Grace had previously seen Jim perform, being in his presence every day was unique. Completely. Like many women, she was attracted to him. He was alluring, dressed in leather, menacing and dark-eyed. However, as Grace would later explain, he was also screwy. Half the time, you were unable to communicate with him. He would be totally lost in a fog of acid, alcohol, marijuana, or everything else he could manage to obtain. Although Jim's environment was not exactly sober, Grace wasn't either. Whirling too quickly for most people to survive on a higher level. Spending one night at the Belgravia Hotel in London, Grace chose to give into the pull. She had been observing Jim for days, experiencing the same unadulterated fascination that so many others did. Consequently, she went to his room and knocked. Utilizing the secret rhythm of Jefferson Airplane. Jim opened the door with that trademark smile even though he was unaware of the knock. Grace never forgot what came next. It was more than a simple hookup. Something crazy happened. They created a wild playground in the hotel room. They plastered each other's bodies with whatever fruit the motel had, including strawberries and grapes. Giggling like children in an unregulated world. Later, Grace remarked that it was like making love to an eye-shaped floating art form. She claimed that Jim was larger than typical, well-built, and she wasn't afraid to express how much she liked it. But passion wasn't the end of the lunacy. Following that wild, on a fruit-covered night, Grace stood up, turned to face him, and said, without pleading, "Call me if you want." She didn't hold off. She was a woman named Grace Slick, and she never pursued anyone. Jim didn't call, though. Never, ever the next day. Later, she joked, laughing about it, saying, "Apparently I'm a bad lay." In actuality, though, it was somewhat painful. Something had ignited in her that night, even if it was just temporary. However, Jim had already started to stray. Lost in a daze, he was inaccessible. Never returned. Grace didn't despise him for it. She got it. Jim wasn't meant to be there. Grounded. He was too deeply dark. Finally, decades later, she utters the words aloud, not only was Jim Morrison insane, but he had already left. A lovely storm, nearing the conclusion, already spinning. What more has she revealed about Jim Morrison's darkness than what Grace Slick already revealed? To find out, keep watching. Later in the Amsterdam trip, Grace Slick recalls Jim's darker side. The bands experienced yet another memorable moment. When someone arrived with a slab of Lebanese gold hashish, everyone was mingling. Grace Slick and the crew of the Jefferson airplane provided a few to Jim Morrison. Jim didn't hesitate, but most people put theirs off. He Saturday immediately ate a large portion of it while sitting on the curb. Using whatever other admirers he had, he pursued it. Had given him pills, hash, and marijuana, nobody was really sure what he had taken. That evening, while at the concert of Jefferson Airplane, Jim staggered onto the stage. He joined Grace in singing. Wrapping his arms around her and swaying as if they were dancing in a dream. The audience erupted. However, Jim eventually danced off stage and returned to the dressing room. And fainted. Although Grace joked about it at the moment, she secretly considered it as a warning sign. Jim was getting out of hand. It didn't surprise Grace when Jim passed away in 1971. He was only 27 years old, discovered dead in a Paris residence, most likely due to a lethal combination of drugs and alcohol. She had previously lost pals like Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin to the same way of life. However, she felt different after Jim died. He made it that far, and she always thought it was a miracle. He pushed his body as though it were a scientific experiment to test how much the body and brain could take. Acid was the substance of choice for Grace, who also utilized substances. Even White Rabbit was written by her. When it's in effect. She did, however, have limits. Jim didn't. Anything would be put into his system by him. Anywhere, at any time. Grace once claimed that she never experienced a negative acid trip since she had no underlying mental health conditions. However, Jim thought he was attempting to flee. Something much more sinister than anyone could perceive. Following Grace Slick's disclosure of Jim Morrison's sinister secrets, many pondered what sort of catastrophe might have awaited him. To find out, keep watching. What actually happened in Jim Morrison's mysterious death? Jim Morrison had a lengthy history of alcoholism and extensive drug use. His difficulties with Rolling Stone magazine, his bandmates, former girlfriends, and others discussed booze. And others who were familiar with him. In a scene from the 1991 film The Doors, Morrison persuades his other musicians to experiment with psychedelic drugs. The film depicts this as the beginning of the band's crazy performances in California's Los Angeles. That scene is depicted as the pivotal moment that contributed to the band's quick ascent to stardom. Sam Burnett, the owner of a nightclub in Paris, published a book in which he asserted that Morrison overdosed on heroin in his club and died. Morrison's death, he said the scene in his flat was set up to appear to be a peaceful mishap. These assertions have never been confirmed to be accurate. Numerous people have persisted in speculating and wondering how Morrison actually died, although heart failure is still the most often accepted cause. Without an autopsy, we might never determine the actual cause of death. After completing LA Los Angeles Woman with the Doors, Morrison announced his intention to visit Paris to his fellow musicians. The majority of them believed it may be a wholesome choice for him. Morrison took a vacation from the Doors in March 1971 and traveled to Paris to join Pamela Courson, his girlfriend. The apartment she had hired was located at 17 to 19 Rue Butriellis, situated in the 4th District's Le Marais neighborhood. Morrison wrote to friends about going through taking lengthy solo strolls through the city. He cut his beard at this period and lost some of the weight he'd put on over the past few months. Inquiring about LA, he also gave percussionist John Densmore a call. In the shops, a woman was selling. He didn't speak to anyone else in the band after that. July 3. Morrison was discovered dead in the Paris apartment's bathtub at around 6 in the morning in 1971. By Courson. He was only 27. Heart failure was recorded as the official cause of death. Despite the fact that no autopsy was performed because it was not required by French law. Later, Courson said that, "Pam, are you still there?" was Morrison's final statement while he was in the bathtub. Singer Marianne Faithfull is among many who have stated that they were there and think Morrison accidentally overdosed on drugs and died. The owner and manager of the Rock and Roll, Sam Burnett Morrison, was found unconscious in the club's restroom at around 2 o'clock, according to Roll Circus nightclub. Morning. Following heroin use. Additionally, he asserted that 2 males who were thought to be drug dealers, Morrison's body was taken out of the club. However, as no autopsy was conducted, these allegations could never be demonstrated. According to music writer Ben Fong Torres, attempts were made to prevent Morrison's passing. Secret. Reporters who called Paris were informed that Morrison was only resting and not dead. In a medical facility. Filmmaker Agnes Varda, a friend of his, later claimed that she assisted in concealing the truth. Varda stated in her last interview before passing away in 2019 that she was one of just 4 attendees at Morrison's private funeral. Morrison passed away precisely 2 years following Rolling Brian Jones, the guitarist for the Stones, and roughly 9 months after Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin passed away. Additionally, they were all 27 years old when they passed away, which contributed to the creation of the 27 Club, a collection of well-known celebrities who all died at the same age. Following Morrison's passing, various theories regarding how he actually passed away have persisted. Which set of what circumstances might have led to Jim Morrison's demise prior to his passing? Watch this space to discover out. Jim Morrison's decline. Jim was gradually losing himself in a life that was engulfing him. His excessive drinking had grown to be a significant hardship for his fellow musicians and his audience, mounting disillusionment. Rehearsals were often missed by him, and when he did appear, he was frequently too inebriated and combative to drill well. Once, Jim found the rest of the band had already left when he got to the studio. Furious, he completely destroyed the place. He never made amends for the harm he inflicted. Jim is careless. On a chilly December night in 1967, his actions finally caught up with him. It was his first arrest. Although it wasn't the first time, he had been afoul of the law since becoming well known. A show by the Doors was planned for New Haven, Connecticut. Prior to the performance, Jim introduced himself to a woman and took her backstage to the shower room, where they shared a kiss. Unaware that Jim was the band's lead singer, a security guard ordered them to leave. Right away. Jim yelled at the guard, "Eat it." With a can of mace in hand, the guard issued a warning. Last chance. Last opportunity to indulge yourself. Jim retaliated. Jim was directly sprayed by the guard. Minutes before he was set to take the stage, pepper spraying him in the face. When Jim's name was revealed to the guard by the band's manager, and the officer expressed regret. He acknowledged he had just realized that he had maced the star he was supposed to keep safe. Jim nevertheless made it to the stage, but in the middle of the performance, his rage boiled over. He ceased to sing. "Everyone despises me," into the microphone he yelled. He then explained to the audience what had transpired with the guard backstage. "I'm just like you guys, man," he said, making fun of him and referring to him as a little blue pig in a little blue hat. The audience screamed, "He did it to me, he'll do it to you." Jim was dragged by police as they stormed the stage. Away. He was taken into custody and accused of indecent behavior, public immorality, and instigating a disturbance. As irate and disgruntled supporters spilled into the streets, 13 more people were also taken into custody. This signified that the Doors were significantly impacted by the first of two significant arrests. The subsequent one occurred on March 1, 1969. In Florida's Miami. There were contradictory reports and a flurry of rumors. According to witnesses, that Jim undressed in front of around 12,000 fans during the performance. According to some, he yelled obscenities while pretending to touch himself on stage. Later, he was convicted of public vulgarity and exposure. He was fined and sentenced to jail. However, did it truly occur? Not one of the more than 500 photos that were shown in court depicted Jim doing what he had been charged with. Jim and his bandmates maintained that he had merely made jokes about it and had never exposed himself. Whatever the fact, the consequences were enormous. Venues wanted to avoid the problems associated with the Doors. To be comprehended. However, he believed that he had ultimately devolved into a filthy rock. Nobody wanted that celebrity on their stage. Jim's pride had been crushed. He thought he had failed himself. His internal anguish became so intense that the only thing he knew how to do was to try to get away from it. He repeatedly drank in an attempt to forget his previous ascent and the subsequent crash. He continued to drink when the ache persisted. His youthful features and slender body were now swollen, concealed by a thick beard. The effects of the drinking were not limited to his physical health, but on his spirit and thoughts. Prior to Jim Morrison's involvement with drugs, things changed his life. What sort of lovely existence did he lead? Watch this space to discover out. Jim Morrison, the boy who started his own rebel rock legend James Douglas Morrison, was Jim's birth name. Clara Virginia and Rear Admiral were his parents. Morrison, George Stephen, who led the U.S. Vietnamese naval forces during the conflict. Jim had a difficult time growing up in a military family. Always shifting from one location to another, he hardly ever had the opportunity to form enduring friendships. As a result, he experienced strange and undeveloped social skills that set him apart from other children. In 1947, His life was irrevocably altered by a terrifying incident while he was just 4 years old. As the Morrisons was traversing the desert when they witnessed a horrifying vehicle collision. Jim saw a number of Native Americans were bloodied and motionless on the ground. In spite of his parents' attempts to shield him from the scene, preventing him from turning away. Jim claimed to have seen the spirit later in life. Native Americans emerge from the corpse of one of the deceased and enter his own. This seemed unreal to him. Time to have had the greatest impact on his life, utilizing it to explain his subsequent odd and careless actions. As time went on and the relocations persisted, Jim discovered it more difficult to make connections with others. Realizing that homes and friendships would not endure, he looked inward and found solace in reading. His favorite writers ended up becoming his closest friends, by his side always. Wherever his life led him, he fell in love with poetry and became enthralled with its profound concepts. Of well-known thinkers, one of the author's quotes inspired the name of his band, The Doors: "All things would appear to man as they are, infinite, if the doors of perception were cleansed." The Doors began playing at Whiskey A Go-Go on a regular basis when they started recording music, a well-known club on the Sunset Strip in Los Angeles. Jim was shy and quiet off stage, yet he changed while performing. He occasionally sang, but he mostly ignored the crowd, having his back to the camera. Fighting to cope with the increasing demands and attention that came with being famous, Jim used alcohol as a coping mechanism. His escape was alcohol, but it also led to him in the direction of self-destruction. Jim and Ray met by happenstance on a beach less than 2 years ago. The Elektra record label signed the Doors to a contract. During the 1960s, a period in which people were starting to discover their own voices and challenge the rules, the social landscape was changing. The Doors rapidly established a reputation as a band that challenged the status quo. Their tunes frequently discussed dark and potent subjects like violence, insanity, and death combined with traditional themes of desire, substance as well as disobedience. Only a few months following their record deal signing, their song, "Light My Fire," became the #1 song on the charts. It peaked at #1 on the Billboard Top 100 in June 1967 and remained there for 3 weeks in a row. Officially, the Doors had come. As their notoriety grew, they took an opportunity to appear on one of the nation's most popular shows, The Ed Sullivan Show. They were scheduled to perform "People Are Strange" and "Light My Fire," however before to the performance, producers requested that they alter a passage in "Light My Fire" that alluded to substance abuse. Can you the line, "Girl we couldn't get much higher," should be changed to, "Girl we couldn't get much better." Jim gave a nod of agreement. Ray Manzarek took his seat at the organ when it was time to perform. Robbie Krieger held his electric guitar in front of him. Behind the drums was John Densmore. Additionally, Jim he moved to the front of the stage, grabbed the microphone, and walked with his brown curls grazing his shoulders. Started singing. "You are aware that it would be false, that I would be dishonest, if I were to say we couldn't rise any higher to you, girl." The band members looked at each other with shrewd grins. They performed the song precisely as it was written. Ed Sullivan then declined to shake their hands. They were warned angrily by a program producer that they would never be invited back. Jim simply shrugged and remarked, "Well, hey man, we already did." This was just one of the several occasions when the Doors would show off the world in which they disregarded the regulations. Who was Grace Slick, and how much of a life did she lead? Like Jim Morrison's that she genuinely comprehended his origins? Watch this space to discover out. The biography of Grace Slick and her ascent in rock music. Grace Barnett Wing was born in Highland Park, Illinois, on October 30, 1939. A Chicago suburb. Ivan Wilford Wing, 1907 to 1987, her father, was British. Her mom, Ivan and Virginia Wing, née Barnett, 1909 to 1983. First crossed paths at the University of Seattle, Washington, and the two eventually got married. In 1949, Chris, Grace's younger brother, was created. Grace Slick saw an item in the San Francisco Chronicle in August 1965 regarding Jefferson Airplane, a recently founded band. She was residing in San Francisco at the time, which was quickly becoming into a center for innovative and captivating music. Although she wasn't primarily interested in music, that changed when she went to see Jefferson Airplane live at a tiny place called The Matrix. She was inspired by that performance. She was so moved that she started her own band. Her husband Jerry Slick plays drums in The Great Society, while his brother Darby Slick plays lead guitar. And bassist David Miner. Grace took on guitar and vocals. On October 15, the band made their debut.